Conventional weapons are bad enough, as we see sadly every day on our news. What happens if we go nuclear? So come on a journey with me and Wolfie to find out actually what would happen if we have a nuclear war. It's grim. Unfortunately, we're very much leaving the realm of Fallout games and fantasy behind us. We can deal with reality as far as we can tell. Our first stop in our theoretical journey into the apocalypse is how can you tell it's going to happen? Many countries no longer have any sort of civil defence that's meaningful, and the civil defence we used to have is very much revered. However, this is civil defence in reality in 1980s England.
If you happen to be having a quiet drink in the Bull's Head at Monash when the Russians decide to attack, then you can relax in the knowledge that you're at the centre of one of Britain's nuclear defence systems. And this is the reason Derbyshire Police have installed here in the pub an early warning system which is operated by landlord Deccio Tatani. Well, if you think that sounds crazy, then listen to this. They haven't yet sent Deccio his warning siren. This is how he warns the rest of the villagers of Monash.
The Russians are coming! The Russians are coming! The Russians are coming!
Locally effective as it is to have the landlord cycling around on a bike shouting, "The Russians are coming! The Russians are coming!" we would expect TV, radio, cell phones to let us know. We actually know what that would look like.
Take immediate action measures. Repeat. The U.S. Pacific Command has detected a missile threat to Hawaii. A missile may impact on land or sea within minutes. This is not a drill. If you are indoors, stay indoors. If you are outdoors, seek immediate shelter in a building. Remain indoors well away from windows. If you are driving, pull safely to the side of the road.
Of course, it was human error that caused the false alert to go out to Hawaii. Nothing like a good old twist of Cold War fear to start the workday. Of course, it also caused conspiracy theorists to dive into it, trying to get cash and views. So how could you actually find out? Well, you could watch a site called Pornhub, and if the viewership dropped dramatically, you could assume that people are panicking and got other things to think about. This actually happened in Hawaii. Me and the Wolfie think the best method is always going to be to keep an eye on what's going on in the world. To use different news reports from different countries around the world, not just your block. Keep an eye on what's going on in the world. Be aware. Don't be paranoid. Don't be frightened. But be aware. With the best will in the world, NBC or Fox are going to give you a very biased view of the world. Unfortunately, print media is not really going to give you any real-time feedback, and it's going to be yesterday's news when you read it. But in the apocalypse, it could make useful souvenirs. However, be aware of the fact that they may not actually use cell phone and TV and radio alerts to warn the general population of your country. For political or military reasons, they may decide not to warn you. There could also be sabotage. High atmospheric nuclear explosions over a sufficiently large area would cause an electromagnetic pulse on the ground that would wipe out pretty much all communications. So you might not know what's going on, but you would know that nothing's working when you turn it on, and there's no radios that are working. So let's get into fantasy land. Chances are there'll be a conventional war first. Chances are there'll be 1 to 10 tactical nukes used in the battlefield because one side's doing badly, and they'll be the side that fires them. And then most people think there'd be a pause before we had an all-out nuclear strike, if we were going to have one. If there's any definite military clashes between forces, get out there, get some food, get some water, get your shelter sorted out. Think about what you're going to need. Think about how you're going to create an area in your home that's going to be blast, heat, and radiation proof for several weeks to months. Think about the supplies you're going to need if you can't leave the house or you shouldn't leave the house. Do your best. This is not going to be perfect. Try not to go shopping in the aftermath of a tactical nuclear strike. Even if you actually find stuff to buy and you don't get injured or killed buying it, you're making yourself a target in a very frightened society. Aww. Get enough for the flies, Wolfie. It's good training for the apocalypse. I'm Huples' cat. Wolfie Terrier is very, very hungry. Wolfie desperately would like to have more food than he's getting. He needs more food. If you can care about Wolfie, please send him money, and I'll make sure that Wolfie gets adequate snacks and adequate nutrition. Please help a little dog in Ontario. He's suffering dreadfully, and it's all the Russians' fault. So what should you do? Well, you should have a written war plan. It should detail what you're going to do if various things happen. What are you going to buy? What are you going to, actions you're going to take based upon different levels of threat category, like if Russia invades another country other than Ukraine, if America sends troops into Moldavia and they start fighting with Russian troops. Things like that, how it laid out. You know, obviously if they fire tactical nukes into Germany and Poland and send tanks in, that's a different level of threat. If your country is fighting with another country and both of your countries are nuclear powered, that is the time to start filling garbage bags with soil and building a radiation proof shelter inside your home, or the best you can do. That's the time to completely maximize water storage inside that home. There's a whole bunch of other things you can do, including windows and all the rest of it. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty. It's pretty straightforward. Think, how do you best protect yourself from blast, heat, and then radiation? This is no game. If you start firing tactical nukes at each other, do not waste time chatting with your friends, your neighbours, your family. Get on with it. Get on with the actions. Build that shelter. Get the soil in bags so you've got clean soil in the house. Or have CNN or similar or the radio on all the time and listen to it all the time as you do these actions. Do you have stuff in the garden? Can you harvest it right now? If you harvest it right now, can you preserve it? Your fridge and freezer. Start to eat everything in the fridge and the freezer right now, keeping the long-term storage pantry items for later on. Can you take stuff out and preserve it? Now, you're going to be in a very small area for 2 to 4 weeks, so think about your pets. You're going to have no mains water, no electricity, probably no communication from the outside, and you're going to have no help whatsoever. It's going to be no entertainment, no healthcare. So think about how you are going to create that space and survive in it to the best of your ability. The rule of thumb's wrong, by the way. It's like shoving a tampon in a penetrating wound. You would never ever do that. The rule of thumb is, I see the formed mushroom cloud in the sky. Now, why I'm still outside and I haven't gone into my shelter is a different issue altogether. But for some reason, I'm still outside and I see the mushroom cloud. You fully extend your arm and put your thumb out like this, bless you Wolfie, like this, and I can no longer see the cloud, I'm safe. If I can see the cloud, I'm going to die. Complete rubbish. It depends on the wind speed, wind direction, a whole bunch of other variables. Depends on if it was a ground burst or an air burst. Depends if it's got cobalt in the weapon. A whole bunch of different things. Bottom line is, if people are firing nukes in quantity anywhere on the planet, even if it's on the opposite side of the planet, you need to be in a shelter and you need to be stocked up and you need to mentally prepare for some very, very tough times ahead. 1 ton of high explosives did this. The missiles that strike us in the West are going to be 500,000 to 1 million tons of TNT equivalency. Where are these missiles going to fall and how many?
All the death and devastation of World War II was caused by the equivalent of 3 million tons of high explosive, 3 megatons. If we represent all that power by one symbol, this is the equivalent power of the world nuclear arsenal now. 18,000 million tons, more than 1 million Hiroshimas. Less than 1% of this explosive power would be enough to destroy every large and medium-sized city in the world.
There's many less nuclear weapons now thanks to arms control.
This is what just 1 ton of high explosive can do. This was an 8-story building, the headquarters of the US Marines in Lebanon. 1 ton of explosive reduced it to rubble and killed 241 people. We have now stored in the nuclear arsenal the power of more than 4 tons of explosive for every man, woman and child on the planet.
Where are they going to hit now they've been fired?
In the United States, for example, there are literally hundreds of military bases, logistics centers, communication centers, and so forth that could come under attack in a nuclear exchange. It happens that many of these targets are located near cities or in cities or urbanized areas. And so it follows that in a full military attack, or what's referred to as a counter-force attack of any magnitude where many, many targets are involved, that many urban areas would come under collateral damage. By that I mean the area around the target is destroyed with the target, because the strategic nuclear weapons have such power that they can literally destroy hundreds of square kilometers of area.
Of course you can look at old maps like these and figure out where the targets were estimated to be and all the rest of it. Do you live near any sort of large military base? It's going to get 1 to 10 megatons on it. Do you live anywhere near a highway hub or a railway hub? Or do you live anywhere near a seaport? They're all military targets. Even if they're inside a city, they're going to get hit. A 1 missile strike is very unlikely in my opinion. If they decide to use ICBMs, they're going to use all of them. Bear in mind, if you live near ports, live near naval bases, expect radioactive tsunamis to come at you. So I hope you understand here, it's as they always say, it's location, location, location. Try not to be in an area downwind of a target or near to a target. Try to make sure that you have wood and water and everything else you might need to sustain yourself. You might plan to bug out. You want to bug out as fast as you can and as soon as you can. Bugging out after the bombs start dropping is probably not going to work out well for you. So to my mind, this would be the minimal number of targets you would see in a nuclear war.
These are the priority nuclear force targets and airfields in Europe.
This is the likely targets you're going to see in a nuclear war.
These, secondary nuclear force targets and major troop concentrations.
What about Britain?
These are only military or counter-force targets that could well be destroyed, even in a limited attack. After a nuclear attack on Britain, it's estimated that somewhere between a quarter and two-thirds of the population would survive.
Sadly for Britain, it looks very, very grim. Okay, the bombs have been fired and they've hit. What's it going to be like? Well, you need to stay in the shelter for 2 to 4 weeks minimum. 6 months you want to spend as little time as possible outdoors. And when you are outdoors, you want to wear clothing that you can clean and not get dust tracked back into your shelter, and you want to wear a face mask. Oh, and you're going to need sunglasses and a hat. The ozone's going to disappear. But in the actual aftermath of the drop, what's it going to be like? Let's listen to some of the civilian victims of Hiroshima, and it's upsetting.
That morning I heard the airplane, and I looked up and I saw something drop from the plane. And just then I felt a strong wind and strong light, and I was knocked down. Suddenly, I was sort of in a big fire, red, grey, dark. I could not see anything. Then, I cannot say how long it took, and I could see around. Surrounding me was like a different world, completely changed, sort of a hell. The people were not like people, more like monsters. I'd never seen such a horrible-looking people.
My first impression was of darkness. I suppose it was all the ashes that were thrown up in the air. As it cleared up, you could see people in waves coming, and they were burned. You could not tell which was their face or which part their back. It seemed they were in a daze. Most of them were stunned. Many were crying. Mothers carrying their half-burned children. The mothers themselves were burned, more than half of their bodies. Skin hanging from the child, skin hanging from their own bodies, practically to the ground.
I was thrown across the schoolyard. The air was so hot I thought I would die. And the next thing I knew, we were right in the middle of a black, tarry rain. That was the radioactive rain that came down. And I recall very clearly people dead, just standing. And you would think they were still alive standing there. And they are just completely charred. People on bicycles in an upright position, frozen and dead.
What about our proud armies that have cost us so much money that we stake our freedom on?
But often torn to pieces or hurled great distances, at overpressures from which no such effects were predicted. Pressures which had done negligible damage to identical items on Shot 9.
Much like our naval fleets, I would expect 100% death rate. What about the home front?
British government post-war reconstruction plans are based on the idea that areas will survive. Wind directions are so variable that the population anywhere in Britain will have to shelter from radioactive fallout for at least a fortnight. And even then, the amount of radiation would be extremely hostile. The river would be polluted by fallout. The ancient castle walls, no defense against the consequences of the collapse of a highly industrialized and specialized society. No electricity. Power stations and the national grid destroyed by bombs and the electromagnetic pulse. No water, no fuel, no telephones, no banks, no manufactured products, not even soap or matches.
Sounds very grim, doesn't it? But what about food? Hopefully you have large amounts of stocks, because
the food shops would be empty. This is the amount of food a family of 4 eats in a year. 60 dozen eggs, 220 pounds of fruit, 370 pounds of vegetables, 540 pounds of potatoes, 200 loaves of bread, 820 pints of milk, and 520 pounds of meat. From now on, Ludlow is going to have to be self-sufficient and cope with an influx of thousands of starving refugees. Many die.
do you have this much?
It's cattle-rearing country, but any beast in the field will probably be dead from radiation. The others will soon be eaten. As for bread, if the wheat crop is reasonably dry, it will burn 17 miles from a 1 megaton fireball.
It's going to be grim. You better ration immediately. If you are relying on hunting and fishing, don't bother. Various reasons, it's not going to work out well for you. But Wolfie, what about America?
This is a map of target areas published by the American Civil Defense Authority. It is in fact incomplete. According to them, the areas with high radiation levels are these. Of course, this official 1982 map would be very different if the wind blew from the west. But let's assume it's correct. The Cornhuskers state. Central Nebraska is almost exclusively given to farming maize or corn on smallish farms. Official estimates maintain that 46% of the American population would survive a nuclear attack. The town of Grand Island sprang up around an important railway junction. The town is there to service the farms, which only produce the one crop, maize. All the supplies to the farms, fertilizer, fuel, machinery, come from very large distances by truck or rail. The immediate impact of a nuclear war would be to cut off the transport that links Grand Island to the economy of the rest of America. Electricity and communications failure would probably paralyze the town. The supermarkets would probably empty in the days of crisis leading up to the attack. Every single item in this supermarket comes from Omaha, the state capital, which is the headquarters of the Strategic Air Command and one of the most important targets in America. The average distance food travels from producer to consumer in America is 400 miles. Most fruit and vegetables are grown in Florida and California and travel an average of 1,800 miles to be eaten. It's estimated that a third of fuel refineries might survive, but 80% of the workers would be killed. Commercial trucking would stop. But it's not only trucks that need fuel. Without it, agricultural machinery is also useless. Many of the farms would still have grain stored, but it would be hard to get it to the towns. To plant the stored grain without machinery would be next to impossible.
We presently produce corn with an input of about 10 hours per hectare of labor, of direct farm labor. If you were to raise corn by hand without this tractor power and so forth, it would require about 1,200 hours, which is 120-fold the manpower input. And in fact, in the United States, we could not produce our crops with manpower alone, even if you got everybody in the United States working on the farm.
Next video in this series on the reality of nuclear war, we'll talk about radiation effects on land and at sea. We're going to talk about nuclear winter, how cold it's going to get where you live, how long will it be cold where you live, and what will happen to the coastlines because of that. We're also going to talk about India-Pakistan going nuclear on each other. Would that destroy our entire civilization? And of course, other stuff. Until then, thanks for watching, I really appreciate it, as does Wolfie. Stay calm, stay safe, and hope peace breaks out soon. Doodles! Doodles! That's it, Wolf. This has been a 2022 Hungry Terrier Looking for His Mummy production.